Hi everyone. Welcome to our panel, Game Accessibility and Indie's Perspective. Before we get going, can we go around just each panelist who just give a brief introduction and share why you're interested in game accessibility, starting with Alex.
Hi everyone, my name's Alex and I work at Polygon Treehouse. We're a very small micro indie studio who make art-led narrative games like Rurky, which is our first game, and Mythwrecked, which is our game we're working on now. Yeah, I'm really interested in accessibility in games, just as a way of making sure as many people can enjoy the games we make as possible. We make kind of non-violent narrative games, so by their very nature, they're quite accessible anyway. There's no time pressure, but yeah, we just want to make sure that as many people can enjoy our games and are welcomed to our games.
Cool. Meredith?
Hello, everyone. So my name's Meredith Hall. I am the Business Development and Marketing Director at Summerfall Studios, which is a small indie studio in Melbourne, Australia, in case you couldn't tell from the accent. We make narrative games mostly. We just released Stray Gods, the role-playing musical, last August. But my background is in a whole bunch of different things across production, marketing, business development, and accessibility. I worked at Vic Screen for a couple of years, funding independent games locally. And for me, I was always kind of interested in accessibility when I entered the industry because I have a condition called fibromyalgia, which means that I often get hit with bouts of fatigue and a number of other kind of symptoms. And I really got interested in accessibility from the perspective of developers and, you know, what it's like to be a disabled developer in the industry, what sort of accommodations there are and aren't. And I co-founded an organization called Accessibility Unlocked across Australia and New Zealand that looks at exactly that. How do we make games more accessible, and how do we make the process of building them more accessible as well?
Great. And Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Leishman. I am Accessibility and UX Design Manager at Hyperluminal Games, which is a small indie development studio based in Dundee. We're kind of a split studio in the sense that we do a lot of work for hire projects, but we also have a few different original IP projects in development at the moment, including Pine Hearts, which is our upcoming game that is launching in the next couple of months. And I have been accessibility lead on that project for the past couple of years. I've been working in the UX and UI field for the majority of my career now, so coming on for 14 years. And I've really always been interested in accessibility. I think it's really an extension of user experience design for me. But I also was diagnosed with ADHD about 4 years ago at age 32. So I spent a lot of my life undiagnosed and kind of fighting against my neurodiverse brain. So going through diagnosis and kind of learning how to work with my brain better and what tools and accommodations made life easier for me made me think a lot about how to make games more accessible as a designer as well. So that's really what I've been doing over the last little while, is working with the team at Hyperluminal to try and work out how we can make the games that we build more accessible for more people.
Great. Thanks, everyone. My name's Connor Bradley. I'm the director of Softleaf Studio. We are a micro indie team based in Belfast. We are best known for our game Stories of Blossom that came out last year. I have depression and generalized anxiety, and games have always been there as a form of release and just a bit of fun, and I love them. But this very real idea that games aren't accessible to everyone is just not how it should be. And this is why I'm really interested in the topic. We as an industry should be ensuring that we're not excluding players who want to play our games. And it's an exciting field to be a part of as well. So this leads us to our first main question. When starting a project, what steps do we take to plan a game's accessibility? Do you want to take that one, Meredith?
Oh, I think for me, it's an interesting perspective in that I often end up coming in the middle of a project. A lot of the times I end up working with independent teams who have kind of like realized halfway through that they need a producer or that they need a marketer, and they want that kind of support. So for me, it's around as soon as you get into that space, immediately looking at a full-blown review and a prioritization with the leaders that are involved. So that's kind of going through the game's accessibility guidelines in a massive spreadsheet that I've built to actually go through line by line, playing the game as if I am a player, noting down anything that I notice that could be a barrier, and then anything that I think could be a barrier, but I don't have the understanding or the background to actually speak to, and that we might need further investigation in. So it's obviously fantastic when it can happen at the start, but that's not always the case. And at least in my experience, it's always been something where I've come in later down the line and kind of gone, hey, what are we planning to handle this?
Yeah, Sarah?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, Pine Hearts has been really our first project that we've been undertaking accessibility with. But at the point that we started looking at accessibility for Pine Hearts, we were actually just past building our first vertical slice. So we were pretty early in development. We had a reasonably good idea of what we were building. So we were in a really fortunate position at that point where we actually ended up taking on the in-game accessibility accelerator, which was like a 4-day boot camp. And as part of that boot camp, we spoke to a panel of different community members about sort of the different challenges that they face playing games, and we gathered a lot of information from that. But we also spent a little bit of time just after that taking our vertical slice to a panel and doing a focus group around it and really gathering a lot of feedback. And that really helped us very early on to understand all of the different potential barriers that might currently exist in the game and might come up later on. And that really helped us to kind of define some of the goals that we wanted to tackle going forward. And we knew that, you know, with it being the first time that we were going to tackle accessibility, we probably weren't going to be able to achieve everything right away. So the next thing that we did was sit down and go, well, what is feasible within the scope and the time that we have for Pine Hearts? What do we think we can achieve this time around? And what do we sort of accept that we can and come back to, you know, in a future project? So that was a really good starting point for us. I think having got to the point where we're nearly done with Pine Hearts now, we've actually done a bit of an accessibility retrospective, and we've looked back at what went well and what didn't go well. And one of the things that we identified as something we want to do going forward is actually having an accessibility pillar. So in the same way that you have design pillars, you create an accessibility pillar that is basically an agreed upon statement for your team. And that really helps the team to focus around what your intent is. So we'll take that forward with us on future projects, but that should really help us to reflect on our accessibility goals throughout development and also really inform the decisions that we make, because we've always got this sort of agreed upon statement that we can reflect back on. So
That's
Awesome.
great. Sorry, Alex.
No,
Just-
go for it.
I was just going to say that's it's so important, those like focus groups in at the beginning, just emphasizing with the players, especially from the disabled community, and just getting to know your players that you're designing for. So it helps with things like creating personas and being able to keep them in your mind when you're developing the game. So then you'd be thinking, well, does this player, would they be running into a barrier, or if what I've just created cause some blocking barrier there? And it's so important at these earlier stages to get this information, so then you're not doing so much work and then having to redo it afterwards. Do you want to pop in then, Alex?
I was going to say, like, yeah, for our process on Mythwreck, so I think one of the key things was looking at the kind of like collecting the learnings from the previous game. So we released Rurky, and like our kind of motto that was adventure for all. I mean that it's kind of like the accessibility, some of the design stuff as well. Like we basically like narrative adventure games, like or no, classic adventure games notoriously can be notoriously obtuse, if that's the right word. Of like, you know, you can, so basically we wanted the puzzle design itself to feel quite approachable and people not to get stuck. But we looked at the kind of some of the feedback about button remapping, and also about like some of the dialogue options. We'd kind of done a catch-all thing with Rurky where we'd had, you know, people could take as much time as they wanted to read the text, and they could progress at their own speed. Some people, that was great for a lot of people, but obviously some people found it a bit frustrating to have to click through stuff all the time. So okay, and there's generally a lot of text to read in our games. The kind of story exploration and story games. So the text was a kind of a really key area for us. But yeah, we looked at kind of like what were the reoccurring bits of feedback in Steam reviews from the game and go, right, okay, so we've done okay. So now let's take those learnings through into the next project. And quite a lot of our stuff is based around like text and readability of text and player choice and how to do that stuff. But yeah, and also then bringing in the kind of the remapping stuff, which has been good. But yeah, and then we fortunate our publisher Whitethorn Games, they're really they have their an accessibility consultant Brit who works there. So actually, even relatively early in the project, we signed with them relatively early, and so actually they were an amazing resource for us to go like they had lots of documentation of like, okay, here's like a here's kind of what we expect to be there in terms of accessibility. So that was really good for us because obviously they've got lots of learnings outside of our experience as well. So basically, it's just getting organized, prioritizing what we think are the kind of critical things that we're going to get the most value of in terms of making people's players' experience better and going from there. But yeah, I think definitely collating all the feedback. And I think with feedback and Steam reviews, obviously you have to be a little bit careful. But I think if you notice things that are reoccurring, then you're like, okay, that's quite interesting. That's been there quite a few times. So I think that's definitely been a valuable process for us.
Yeah,
I think also,
definitely.
sorry. I was just going to say, like, I think also on that note, like doing that work really early and getting that involvement and that breadth of understanding early really helps the team to kind of understand the impact of potential design decisions. Because a lot of the time, especially in smaller teams and in smaller studios, you've got people going off and having conversations one-on-one, in small groups and potentially making design decisions that if no one in the room is there ready to push back and go, hey, that's going to have an impact here, or that could cause this, that can get lost along the way. And you're always kind of trying to claw back to keeping to potentially that, accessibility pillar. So helping them to understand that impact early by having the conversations and bringing the findings to them lets them then become those champions in those conversations that they might have along the way, which makes a huge difference long term, I think.
Definitely. And looking at other games as well and seeing what other people have done, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. It's definitely a space that you can innovate in. But yeah, there's a lot of great games that are doing a lot of great stuff, and they're usually the best place to look when first starting. Given the time and budget constraints that indies have, how do you go about prioritizing which areas of accessibility to tackle? Do you want to take that one, Sarah?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for us, we started by looking at sort of different characteristics and trying to work out where we could maybe try and get to a sort of base level of accessibility across all of those characteristics. So we knew there were more extreme characteristics that we probably weren't going to be able to tackle this time around, but we tried to kind of find a balance between all of those things. But in terms of sort of thinking about how to manage sort of time and budget, one of the things that we really focused in on was how to build accessibility into our pipeline in a really sustainable way. So one of the things that we did was to focus on tools, essentially. So we ended up building our own accessibility and our own settings and accessibility framework, which is in the Unity engine. And so all of the settings that we built were built upon this framework with the intent that essentially as we move on to the next project, we pull this framework with us. And so although we might not be able to do everything that we want to with the first project, then hopefully the next time around, then we've already got the settings that we built previously, and we're building new things the next time around. So we're tackling new challenges each time, and that means each project is a reinvestment of time, but we're learning new things and we're tackling new barriers. So that was kind of the best way that we could think to sort of try and carry effort forward with us, but also hopefully build more accessible games over time. So So that's the way we've been kind of trying to tackle that from our end. And I think the other thing was definitely around talking about the scope and those goals and what we wanted to achieve, and being able to let go and maybe cut things from the scope so that you could better deliver on the things that you had intended to. So there were some settings ultimately that we had to cut from Pine Hearts, which was a really difficult decision to make, because you don't want to create barriers for people, but you ultimately only have the time that you have available. So you've got to focus it and make sure that what you're building is as robust as it can be. So yeah.
And I think to that point as well, as you say, it is difficult to cut stuff, and that's one thing with Stories Blossom. We were trying to do absolutely everything, and you just have to call it quits at some point and say this is good enough for this game, and we'll take that knowledge forward to our next, and we can work upon that. Because in the real world, you are working with a budget and time, and you just have to make those cuts here and there, and hopefully that'll be addressed in the future.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing I realized along the way was, even though we couldn't do everything we wanted to, and we maybe had to cut things, ultimately we were on a journey. And the fact that we've got to this point in development with the number of settings that we have in and the work that we've done so far, well, that's a huge difference from where we would have been had we not tried to put any accessibility in at all. So it's always a journey forward as well.
I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Is that, so I spoke previously about the learning from our previous game and doing stuff. And I think when you look at accessibility and all the stuff you could possibly do, it maybe could be quite overwhelming. I think at looking at like what you can do, and then I think bringing those learnings forward and building upon them, because then it doesn't feel like such a huge undertaking, right? Go, oh, we've done that stuff already, we know how to do that again, or let's and I think in terms of what for our stuff, I think one of the key things that we realized last time is that we shared a lot of stuff on social media with Rurky, and we had some text scrolling in, and actually an accessibility consultant commented on it and said, oh, actually this is so the equivalent with someone with hearing difficulties of nails down a chalkboard. It's very great, and they can't read all the text straight away. Obviously, from a stylistic point of view, a lot of people quite like that because it reminds them of Ace Attorney or some games and that kind of thing. So I think when first we were okay, cool. Well, actually, we've got a lot of text in the game. Removing the scroll makes it immediate. People can read it quick and get to the game. So I think for Rurky, we settled on that option. And I think with Mythrex, we're okay, well, actually, the text stuff is it's reasonably quick for us to provide those options, right? To basically have people turn the scrolling on and off, to people have light and dark backgrounds, because there's so much text in the game. It's a big part of the experience. It made a lot of sense for us to focus a lot of our efforts around those areas and give just the player as many options to tweak that to they want. So we've got you can turn on auto progress, you can turn off scrolling, you can change dark light backgrounds. And generally, as a baseline, it's very high contrast. Anyway, there's a kind of a speech thing. So it's about. I think that was a key thing for me. It was rather than trying to find the perfect solution to something, whereas everyone's needs and wants a different. Actually providing the options and letting people choose. So then that was kind of one of the key dings that went off in my head after the last project. Probably a little bit slow on the uptake, and I think that was one of probably the key things for me of going into this project is okay, we don't have to find the perfect solution. We have to basically give people the choice, and then they can find out what the best fit for them is. And generally outside of the tech stuff, there's been a number of different things we've tried, but generally we try and even though games are 3D kind of exploration games, we don't have any player camera control. It's all kind of orchestrated, so the player doesn't have to kind of do any camera control. So we generally have, I don't know if I really call that accessibility, but maybe it's approachable design. It doesn't need, you don't need to be really pad dexterous to be able to do it. But yeah, I think basically kind of prioritizing the areas that are the most important to your game, and that'll be different, right? So if we're ours is a very story game. We focus on this. If someone's making Tekken, then they'll go like, okay, right, ours is very motion, right? It's need to really pick out these things. Let's do loads of high contrast stuff. So I think identifying where your efforts are going to be best spent, and you're not trying to solve a very complicated problem that's like in 1% of your game versus ignoring something that's in 70% of your game that's going to be a big part of the experience. So I think, being practical in that way as well is important.
I think that's exactly it. It's like understanding your game and where you can consider like value versus impact. Like there's going to be a lot of players, if you're dealing with a narrative game, where text is going to be the number one thing that's going to bother them. And exactly like you say, like providing those options is going to make a difference for a wider subset of players. So I remember when I worked on a mobile game called Hollow Vista, which had kind of like player controlled movement, we were immediately like, okay, this is the focus of the game, is essentially moving this around the room. But for someone that has limited movement or is unable to move in that way, how are we going to actually allow them to do that without having to move around a physical space? So for us, that was immediately priority number one, was giving them other input options to actually do that. And then all the things that you've mentioned around like contrast and text size, and knowing that those are going to be things that are going to have a broad level of value to a lot of people. But then impact came up for us when we were thinking about, we had some kind of like glitching text effects and visual effects that we knew could potentially, while unlikely, could potentially trigger epilepsy. So for us, we were like, the impact of that happening for someone who is playing the game is going to be huge. So that's something we want to make sure we minimize and make sure there's an option to actually turn that off. It's always kind of like walking a tightrope, I find, of like, the time that you have, the scope that you have, the budget that you have, and how far you can get along that tightrope in kind of like laying the tracks of all these different options, while also kind of, getting to the finish line that you need to get to. It was similar for Stray Gods as well. Like we put a lot of emphasis on text options, a lot of emphasis on sound options, because, as a musical game, you want people to be able to balance different levels. And then also on like blind accessibility. So actually having there be, audio descriptions and people being able to play it in full as a musical game. So yeah, that understanding your game and where you can build that value is really, really important, I think.
Definitely. And I think even just having the right mindset when you're designing the game, and just sometimes just making a good design choice, like that doesn't cost you anything. And those kind of things, if you're taking that kind of process throughout the developments, you're making these choices as you go. And again, back to thinking about your player as you're designing, it just saves so much effort in the long run. How then do you get info about your game's accessibility out to your players? Do you want to take that one, Alex?
Sure. So I think like one, you can loudly proclaim it on social media. I think it's like it's a good one to kind of and obviously with things like this, we're doing this panel now. I think like being proud and like evangelizing is maybe a slightly strong word, but what I mean, it's like being like we're doing this stuff, it's helping people, and it's really, really good. I think also like so there's kind of that side of things, and I think generally as indie developers, social media is one of the key things we do. I think also in like maybe slightly more formal things like Steam news posts and stuff, like going like this and keeping people up to date on how the accessibility things are evolving, that you're listening to feedback and that kind of thing. I think in terms of like in game, I think because you can have all those incredible features in there, and if no one opens up the option menu, then they might go, I can't play this. This is unplayable. And so I think also highlighting in game, it's probably sounds obvious, but it's maybe something that happens more often than not, is that you've got all the options there, and you can go making people aware they can go and do this stuff as part of the main game. I think I've seen a few games do stuff now where they almost have like a pre-start screen accessibility thing, which I think is a really good idea, where it's like, okay, it's not hiding away before you kind of getting stuck into the story. It's like, here's some options, get it set up as you'd like, which I think is a really nice idea. But yeah, I think if there's stuff there you're proud of and you think people are going to get enjoyment from, I think it's definitely worth highlighting. I think it's just nice as well. It kind of lets potential players know that what type of company you are, and that you kind of want to welcome people in, and that you're thinking about them. I think that's it's won't necessarily even say it as like it's like a marketing thing, because that kind of feels a little bit, obviously people have to market their games, but it's like but actually it's just like I'm guessing like we're all people, right? We're all people making games, and we want the people to the people to feel welcome. And I think when people see people rather than like necessarily big monolithic companies trying to make a difference, I think it's something they really appreciate. So I think it's I would say not being need to be reserved about these things. It's like if you're sharing stuff about your accessibility options in the same way you'd share a new animation or a new character, it's kind of that level of something that people will be interested in. So yeah.
Absolutely. And, I think one of the challenges that happens a lot of the time for disabled players who want to play a game is not being able to find that information outside of the game itself, exactly like you say. And then if they don't know if they can purchase and play it, there's a massive barrier there already, right? Like the purchase of the game in itself becomes almost inaccessible because they've then got to go and do all this labor to kind of find out exactly what is possible for them. I know for Summerfall and for teams that I've worked with in the past, for us, it's like really part of our what we would call like expectation management, like in the same way that we talk about like the length of the game. For us, it's about identifying like how we share that information, sharing that in multiple places. But something that I've done both on Stray Gods and on Hollow Vista is build out a full web page that details every in-game option, every piece of information that is either around, how do saves work, how do you play the game as a whole, things that might, if you're someone who's a little unsure or a little nervous or you have, a disability that you're considering, might stop them from wanting to take the chance on something. Because exactly like you said, it does also flag to them that matters to you as a studio and that you care about it. And then we do the same thing. We have, a splash screen that comes up that lets people know, including like kind of the content warnings as well, and kind of making it this holistic place to go that gives them the information that they need. But other games that I've worked on, like Hollow Vista, we tutorialized it at launch as well. So when you launch the game for the first time, it tells you about some of the options that you have as you're starting to learn the game, and then you're kind of off and away, so you can make that decision early if it's pertinent to you. All useful ways, because you kind of do have to come at these things from a million different angles so that you can kind of reach all those different people that might need it.
Do you have anything on that, Sarah?
Yeah. I mean, Alex put it beautifully in terms of social media. I think that's such a critical tool, right? And there's such a strong community on social media as well to reach out to. We also spent time putting all of the accessibility settings that we put into Pine Hearts are up on the Steam page as well, and we'll more than likely be doing dev diaries and other bits and pieces that cover them in more detail as well. One thing that we've been kind of focusing over the last sort of 6 months since we got to a sort of demo playable state of Pine Hearts was thinking about the events that we attend. So we went and took part in EGX last year, and we really wanted to make sure that our booth space at EGX was also accessible. So we spent a lot of time pulling together our own accessible hardware kits, so including sort of the Xbox adaptive controller and Logitech Switch sets and a joystick as well. So we took all of that down with us, and we had one dedicated part of the booth that had all of that equipment set up. And that was an incredible way of honestly just generating conversation around accessibility. We had a huge number of people coming up who maybe didn't necessarily need that kit, but were really interested in it and talked to us about it, and then got really passionate about accessibility through talking to us about it, which was amazing because it's just hopefully percolating it out further into the industry as well. So that's something that we've been continuing to do since then. We've done a few different events where we've taken that with us. We're now in talks with the National Museum for Scotland to maybe have some of our kit at one of their upcoming game exhibitions as well, which is really exciting. So we're just trying to do our best to kind of make these events more accessible as well, and hopefully demo Pine Hearts in a way that is available for people to pick up and play as well. So and I think as well, in terms of sort of signposting within the game, we've talked a little bit already about that sort of first time user experience, and that's something we decided to do for Pine Hearts as well. It was one of the very first bits of feedback we got from the community panel that we talked about, was how frustrating it was for them to start a game and have to go digging for the accessibility settings. So we chose to tackle that in two ways. The first one was to have sort of an onboarding flow where there's a couple of basic settings that you can set up from the bat, and then there's clear signposting that there's more available in the settings menu. And then the other thing that we did was we actually pulled all of the accessibility settings together under their own individually labeled tab within the settings menu. So there's an accessibility tab there, because a lot of players mentioned to us that it's really frustrating having to dig through all of the different tabs in a settings menu and not knowing if there's going to be a setting that's available to them. So having them all collated in one place just made it a little bit easier for them. So yeah, so we've kind of tackled it in game and out of game as well. But yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. We did the same when we were at Gamescom. We had an accessibility setup at our booth, and you're completely right in terms people just coming over because they're interested. It's something that they're not typically seeing, which is a shame, but it's where we're at currently as an industry that not many booths do have an accessible setup. But being able to showcase that and teach people and even just other developers there as well that not everyone can use standard controls and things like that. And I think in terms of online events and promotion of the game, I think it's always great that when the game is announced, that the accessibility is announced at the same time, so players can get in the same hype as everyone else when a game is fairly just announced, so then they can see if can we play this as well, kind of thing. Those kind of things are really important, and we took the approach of just sharing pretty much everything. We were very transparent with our design process with our accessibility, and people notice that and they jump on board and give you feedback and want to help you test the game. And through all of that kind of process, we were able to then hire people from the disabled community from all around the world, really. And through that, then they made the game better. And that is critical in my opinion. So one of the last questions we have then is, if you could go back in time, what would be the best piece of advice that you could give yourself? Do you want to take that one, Meredith?
Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, considering how I've approached accessibility, thinking about developers as well as players, I think it's to give yourself as an individual when you're trying to do this kind of work more grace. You can't do everything, and that's okay, and you're not going to get it perfect. And I think because it's such important work, if you're interested in it and you care about it, you put a lot of pressure on yourself to get it perfect. But this is work that requires so many of us to do it together. We launched Accessibility Unlocked maybe like 6 months before the pandemic as a group of, volunteers with accessibility needs who were all working full time. We were like, we're going to do everything forever. And I think very quickly we realized that, we were limited in what we were able to do as well. But the biggest thing we learned was that what we were able to do still mattered and still made a difference, and continues to, with the people that are able to kind of reach out and start that process of learning for themselves as well. So yeah, I think give yourself and others more grace, and you have time, and it is going to be a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of I think the advice I think I would give myself is, I think you just it's kind of, you get on the journey, right? And I think that's the kind of thing. I think generally in everything, right? As you get more seasoned in years, like I am, I think just the importance of maintaining an interest in everything and wanting to learn and get better at stuff. And I think that's the kind of one of the things that's really key as people grow as like developers and creatives, is to kind of maintain that interest and like, oh, there's a new thing here I haven't considered. I think generally like a really good thing for anyone, inside and outside of accessibility, is to kind of foster that appetite and to be interested in wanting to learn, to find out about things. And then I think and then just get started, right? I think it's basically, it kind of, like I say, it could be a little bit overwhelming. We go, actually, well, here's some stuff that's quite achievable. We can do this. And I think I think you're saying you can be quite open and honest about your limitations in terms of like what we can do, what we can't do this time around. But then once you're on the yellow brick road, putting one foot in front of the other, being able to go, right, now let's get better and like take those learnings forward. So I think yeah, I think yeah, I think you'd hope that the vast majority of developers would be like really interested in something that would help people enjoy their games more. So I think yeah, just kind of getting started and being interesting, opening, and like engaging with it. And even if there's stuff that you can't do now, you can go, oh, that's I'm aware of that now. And you go, well, that's something that's lodged away somewhere or in a document online, that you go, right, let's then let's get better. And I think just so just like the awareness of it and getting started on that journey is a really important thing.
Yeah, I mean, you both beautifully put said what I was going to say, which is really exactly that. It's it's a journey, and being kind to yourself and understanding that you're not gonna hit everything, and you're not gonna unfortunately make it as accessible to absolutely every person right off the bat. It's an extremely large wealth of people out there, and different needs and different overlapping needs as well. So being honest with yourself up front about what you can do, and really reducing that scope down and giving yourself as much time as possible to do those things to the best of your ability, and then let go of what you can't this time around is a big thing. And the other thing that I had down here is it takes a village. It really does. It can't be the responsibility of just one person in your team. It's really important that you take the whole team on the journey with you, and you give them the tools to help make that happen. That innovation is going to come from all kinds of different people across the different departments in your team, whether that's your tech specialists, whether it's your artist, whether it's your designers. So having all of them on the road with you is a really important part of that process as well. So yeah, don't take it all on your own shoulders. In short, make sure that you keep other people involved in the process along with you.
I would completely echo all of those points. Absolutely. Like, it's so easy to try take on everything yourself and to try conquer the world of accessibility. And for one game project, especially if it's your first project doing it, there's only so much that you can do. And we have like a long list of things that we wanted to do, but we just had to cut them out. And it's really just not beating yourself up about not getting it perfect. And it's just having the right mindset that you're doing something, which is a lot than some are doing. And it's just taking those small steps one bit at a time, and they add up and have a huge impact on your players. And as you go, that will then hopefully increase. And as Alex says, just keeping an interest in it, and really there's always people doing new things, and just taking inspiration from that and seeing, oh, well, I'm making a game somewhat similar. What could I do to do something similar? Or making sure that you can, yeah, just, I think it's so important to just be always on that journey of trying to develop yourself in the accessibility space. And one point I would also add is, in those earlier stages, try to do less before committing too much to a piece of work. So get players in testing, even if it's like sort of wireframes and stuff like that, that you're able to evaluate. And that way then you can get the feedback from your players, and being able to then implement those changes and test it again to see if you have achieved what they were looking for. And then that really means that you can just go forward with confidence that this will be less of a barrier for some people. And really, that's one thing that I wish we would have done when we were starting. We did do a lot of early testing, but we could have done more. I think we had designed our settings menu about 4 or 5 times, and that's has a knock-on effect on production. And really, if we took smaller steps and got those tested, and before producing assets and doing all layouts and stuff, it can be really helpful for that. But on that note, I think that's pretty much all the time we have today. So thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to GA Conf for having us. There's been a lot of great info there and a lot that I'll be taking forward myself. And yeah, I really look forward to playing all of your future accessible games.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks for having us.
you.
It's been really great, and yeah, I've definitely made some notes for myself. So yeah, been really awesome panel. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, folks. It's been really lovely to speak with you all today on this.
Okay, bye for now.